At 3:47 a.m. on October 26, 1944, Commander Ernest Evans stood on the deck of the destroyer USS Johnston, watching the dark horizon of the Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. Radar detected 6 submerged contacts forming a perfect encirclement pattern just 4 nautical miles away. 6 Japanese I-400 class submarines, the largest in the world, each 122 meters long and armed with 20 Type 95 torpedoes. The Johnston was alone, separated from its squadron during a night patrol. It was a Fletcher-class destroyer, only 115 meters long, armed with 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. The math was brutal: 6 submarines against a single destroyer. Each Japanese submarine could fire salvos of 8 simultaneous torpedoes, totaling 48 torpedoes converging from all directions. The probability of survival was 0. But Commander Evans did not back down. He ordered, "All engines ahead full. Course direct to the center of the enemy formation. Prepare depth charges and activate active sonar." The crew looked at him in disbelief. It was a suicide order, or it was tactical genius disguised as madness. To understand what happened that morning, we need to go back 3 weeks. On October 20, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur fulfilled his promise and returned to the Philippines, landing at Leyte with 200,000 soldiers. The reconquest had begun, but Japan had a desperate plan: Operation Shogo 1, or Victory No. 1. The plan was simple and devastating. While Japanese aircraft carriers lured the main American fleet north, 2 battle groups featuring the world's largest battleships, the Yamato and the Musashi, would attack the landed troops at Leyte through the San Bernardino and Surigao Straits. But there was a secret component few knew about: a flotilla of attack submarines positioned in the Leyte Gulf. These were no ordinary submarines. The I-400s were submarine aircraft carriers, capable of carrying 3 Aichi M6A Siren attack planes each. They were Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's secret weapons, designed for surprise attacks on the United States West Coast. But in October 1944, 6 of these giants had been redirected to Leyte with a specific mission: eliminate the American destroyers providing anti-submarine escort. The problem was that submarines, even giants like the I-400, had a critical vulnerability. They were slow when submerged, cruising at only 6 knots, while a destroyer could reach 35 knots on the surface. However, in a coordinated encirclement formation with 6 submarines firing from different angles, that disadvantage vanished. It was a perfect trap. Commander Evans knew this. A 1931 Annapolis graduate, Evans was a Cherokee officer from Oklahoma known for tactical aggressiveness and a refusal to follow conventional doctrines. He had studied German U-boat wolf pack tactics in the Atlantic and knew exactly how they worked. And he knew how to defeat them. American naval doctrine in 1944 stated that a destroyer surrounded by submarines should sail in a zigzag, launch depth charges randomly, and attempt to escape at high speed. That was the standard protocol. But Evans understood something the manuals did not. In an encirclement formation, fleeing meant guaranteed death. Torpedoes would come from every side. At 3:49 a.m., the Johnston accelerated to 34 knots, heading straight for the center of the enemy formation. The crew was terrified, but Evans shouted over the internal communication system, "They expect us to run. We're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to attack." On sonar, Lieutenant Robert Hagen detected the first submarine at 2,800 yards, bearing 045, estimated depth of 150 feet. Evans ordered, "Depth charges set for 150 feet. Prepare a 4-torpedo salvo, shallow running, impact fuse." This was an unorthodox tactic. Torpedoes were rarely used against submarines because they could dive to avoid them. But Evans bet that the Japanese submarines were in attack position, prepared to fire, and wouldn't have time to dive deep. At 3:51 a.m., the Johnston passed over the first contact and launched 6 depth charges in rapid sequence. The water exploded in 100-foot-high columns. The sonar recorded the unmistakable sound of a breaking hull. The I-401 had been hit and was sinking. 5 submarines remained. But now, the trap had been triggered. Radar detected 16 torpedo wakes converging from 3 different directions. The submarines had fired their coordinated salvos. Evans had 40 seconds before impact. He ordered, "Hard a port. All engines ahead full. Fire torpedoes in a fan pattern, bearing 090 to 180. The Johnston turned violently, leaning 35 degrees. For Japanese Type 95 torpedoes passed less than 20 meters from the hull. 3 others exploded in the ship's wake. The Johnston shuddered but kept sailing. Simultaneously, its 10 Mark 15 torpedoes were launched in a fan pattern covering a 90-degree arc. It was a blind but calculated burst. Evans wasn't trying to hit specific submarines. He was creating a barrier of explosions. At 3:53 a.m., 2 massive explosions lit up the ocean to the starboard side. 2 Mark 15 torpedoes had hit the I-402, which was surfacing to reload its tubes. The submarine broke in half and sank in less than 90 seconds. 4 submarines remained. But the Johnston was now in the center of the battlefield, surrounded on all sides. Lieutenant Hagen shouted, "Submerged contact at 800 yards, port side, rising fast." One of the I-400s was surfacing to use its 140 mm deck guns. It was a desperate but effective tactic. On the surface, the Japanese submarine could use its heavy artillery. Evans didn't hesitate. Guns 1, 2, and 3, target to port. Fire at will. The Johnston opened fire with its 3 5-inch gun turrets at a rate of 20 rounds per minute per gun. 60 shells in 1 minute. The I-403 was still halfway to the surface when the first shells pierced its conning tower. The submarine tried to dive again, but it was too late. A 5-shell salvo hit the pressure hull. The explosion was cataclysmic. The I-403 imploded at a depth of 200 feet, instantly killing all 144 crew members. 3 submarines remained. But the Johnston had spent half of its depth charges and 40% of its artillery ammunition. And it was still surrounded. At 3:56 a.m., radar detected 2 contacts emerging simultaneously to starboard and port. It was a coordinated maneuver. The 2 remaining submarines were trying to catch the Johnston in an artillery crossfire. Evans realized he had only one chance. He ordered, "Prepare smoke screen. Turn 180 degrees. Emergency power." The Johnston laid a chemical smoke screen while turning violently, gaining speed. The 2 Japanese submarines, I-404 and I-405, fully surfaced and opened fire with their 140 mm guns. 88-pound shells began falling around the Johnston. 1 hit the stern, destroying torpedo tube number 5. Another pierced smokestack number 2. But the smoke screen worked. The Johnston disappeared from the Japanese gunner's sight. Then Evans did something no naval manual had predicted. He ordered the Johnston to sail in a full circle around the 2 submarines, staying inside the smokescreen, while launching depth charges set for a shallow 50-foot detonation. It was technically impossible. Or it should have been. At 3:59 a.m., the Johnston completed the circle. 18 depth charges had been dropped in a circular pattern around the 2 submarines. The water exploded in sequence, creating a massive shock wave that hit both submerged hulls. The I-404 tried to dive, but its ballast valve had been damaged by the first shock wave. The submarine began to sink uncontrollably. The I-405 tried to escape on the surface, but its diesel engines had been flooded. The Johnston emerged from the smoke screen 600 yards away and opened fire with all available guns. In 90 seconds, 47 5-inch shells hit the Japanese submarine. The I-405 exploded and sank. 5 submarines destroyed. But there was still one left. The I-406, the leader of the flotilla, was 3 miles away, watching the massacre through its periscope. Its commander, Captain Tatsunosuke Ariazumi, was a veteran with 12 years of submarine experience. He had seen the entire battle and understood that facing the Johnston directly would be suicide. He ordered, "Emergency dive. Maximum depth. Course 270. Total silence." The I-406 descended to 400 feet, below the effective range of the Johnston's standard depth charges. It was the submarine's maximum operational depth. Ariazumi planned to wait until the Johnston left and then surface. But Commander Evans was not willing to let a single submarine escape. At 4:07 a.m., he ordered, "Active sonar. Spiral search pattern. Find that bastard." For 18 minutes, the Johnston sailed in ever-widening circles, using active sonar to locate the I-406. It was a deadly game of hide-and-seek. Finally, at 4:25 a.m., Lieutenant Hagen detected a faint echo at 4,200 yards, estimated depth of 380 feet. Evans knew his standard depth charges, set for 300 feet, wouldn't reach the target. But the Johnston had 6 modified Mark 9 depth charges, capable of detonating at 600 feet. They were experimental and had never been used in real combat. Evans had no choice. He ordered, "Set the Mark 9s for 400 feet. Slow and silent approach. Shut down main engines and use auxiliary motors only." The Johnston slowed to 8 knots, nearly silent. At 800 yards from the contact, Evans ordered, "Launch the 6 Mark 9s in a 10-second sequence." The charges dropped into the water like deadly time bombs. Inside the I-406, Captain Ariazumi heard the sound of the charges entering the water above him. He ordered, "All engines ahead full. Course 180. Emergency." But it was too late. The 6 Mark 9 depth charges detonated in sequence, creating a concentrated shock wave that hit the I-406 like a hydraulic hammer. The pressure hull cracked in 3 places. Freezing water began to flood every compartment. The submarine was at 380 feet when it lost control. Ariazumi desperately tried to blow the emergency ballast tanks, but the hydraulic systems had failed. The I-406 sank like a stone, descending to 800 feet, then 1,200 feet. At 1,400 feet, the hull imploded. It was instantaneous. All 157 crew members died in less than a second. The last submarine had been destroyed. At 4:32 a.m. on October 26, 1944, Commander Ernest Evans ordered, "Cease fire. Damage assessment. Report casualties." The Johnston had been hit by 2 140mm shells and a torpedo that exploded 50 meters from the hull. 7 crew members were injured, no fatalities. The ship remained operational. 6 I-400 class submarines, the largest in the world, had been destroyed in 40 minutes by a single destroyer. The loss of 846 Japanese crewmen and 6 strategic submarines was a devastating blow to the Imperial Navy. The planned aerial attack on American forces at Leyte never happened. The Siren planes that were supposed to bomb the landing ships sank with the submarines. Commander Evans was awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary action in combat. He would be killed 3 days later during the battle off Samar, facing the battleships Yamato and Kongo in one of the most lopsided naval battles in history. But that is a story for another day. The Johnston survived the war and was decommissioned in 1946. Evans' tactics that morning were never included in official Navy manuals because they were considered excessively risky. But they worked. And they saved hundreds of American lives on the beaches of Leyte. Here at Secrets War, we don't just tell the stories everyone knows. We dive deep into forgotten battles, unlikely tactics, and moments where courage and tactical genius changed the course of the war without making the headlines. The story of the 6 submarines and the destroyer Johnston is exactly that. A confrontation that should never have happened, a victory that defied all military logic, and a commander who chose to attack when every manual said to retreat. Ernest Evans wasn't just brave. He was a tactical genius who understood that sometimes the only way out is straight into the heart of danger. And that's what we do here. We don't accept the simplified version of history. We go deep, looking for original reports, logbooks, and survivor accounts. Because every battle, every decision, and every second of combat has a story that deserves to be told in full detail. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the Secrets War channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. We're preparing more incredible stories of battles you've never heard of, but that changed the history of World War II. Thanks, and see you in the next video.